Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about dealing with procrastination. I don't know. Maybe we can just do it tomorrow. Okay, we are discussing procrastination today. This is a big, hairy, scary topic, and I know lots of people deal with this, so, it's not unusual. If you have to deal with this a little bit, you're probably not too different than everyone else. I definitely have had my struggles. It's still something I battle constantly. I made a video a while back talking about some of the emotional challenges of making art, and I felt like procrastination would have fit into that video, but it just would have doubled the length of the video because it's a big subject on its own. So I really wanted to make a video that was just discussing procrastination, where we can just talk about strategies, kind of what works for me, and hopefully offer some good guidance for any of you kind of trying to solve that problem. So before I say anything else, I have to start out by recommending that you pick up a copy of Niel Fiore's The Now Habit. I will leave a link to it in the description here. Most of what I'm going to talk about today can be traced back to that book. So if I can get you to read the book, it'll do more good than whatever I say here. But still stay here and still listen. I have some good things to say. But if you haven't left yet, I'm going to talk about how I've personally processed the recommendations in the Now Habit and kind of how I deal with procrastination. So, in short, most people that are going to give you advice about procrastination are going to tell you to set goals and be more disciplined and to plan out your day and work harder and to create incentives for yourself. And if you've watched any of my videos, you probably know that that's not really my approach. And my attitude probably has its origins in the Now Habit. I've also drawn from Stephen Pressfield and a bit of David Allen, but I'll get to these points as we talk about procrastination. So let me start with the important stuff that comes from the Now Habit. One thing that the book talks about is why we procrastinate. It gives one of the best descriptions and the explanations of why this happens. And I think that's really important if we want to know how to fix it. And so what Niel Fiore says, and I'm not going to give an exhaustive summary, I'm just going to kind of talk about the things that I remember and kind of what mattered most to me. But what he says basically is that that procrastination is a way of dealing with anxiety of doing some type of work. Maybe you're anxious because the work seems difficult or boring, or you hate your boss and you don't like that he's forcing you to do crap work, or you're scared about the results of finishing your work, whether that means being scared about other people seeing your work and ridiculing it, or being scared of success, or that it'll be maybe a waste of time in some way, and you'll realize you should have spent your time doing something else. There are lots of reasons to be anxious about work, and procrastination is a way of coping with that anxiety. You could be anxious about other stuff in life. There's plenty of things in life just to make you anxious that aren't going to have to include work. But there's some interesting paradoxes that emerge when you start considering what your particular anxiety is. For instance, one of my big anxieties is that my work won't be good enough. And oddly enough, it's a desire for perfection that holds me back from wanting to sit down and draw. I want it to be amazing, and I know I'm going to have to struggle to get it to a point that I want. And that can be really intimidating. I think this is pretty common reason to procrastinate. People want their stuff to be perfect. They want their friends and their peers to respect their work. Particularly when it comes to art, they want to produce something to demonstrate that they aren't amateurs, that they aren't just playing around, but that they're creating something valuable and professional. So that's my particular anxiety. You could have that same anxiety or another or a combination of both or more. But one of the first great points that the Now Habit makes is how to respond to this anxiety. It talks about how we conceive of the work we do as if we're walking on a tightrope between two buildings that's like 500 feet up in the air. In other words, we tell ourselves the story that failure will be disastrous, that if we fall off the tightrope, we're going to fall to our deaths, that if we aren't successful with this project we're doing, it's going to ruin our lives. So the first great recommendation for the Now Habit is that you have to find a way to put the tightrope on ground level. So when we're thinking about this in terms of work, and so that basically means we want to conceive of failure as having much smaller consequences. If we fall off the tightrope, we're just going to fall a foot, or we're just going to, be on the ground. So think about this in the same way that you think about your work. Start thinking about the work you're doing in a way that makes it less scary. For example, you can ask yourself, like, what is the worst that could happen? This is a fantastic exercise to go through. Consider the worst case scenarios and try and do it dispassionately. Imagine that you're, Spock or Data, just like this being without emotion, and just really rationally paint a picture of the worst case scenarios. Most of the time you'll find as you do this that the worst case scenarios really aren't that bad, or they really aren't bad at all. Even better, imagine that you're some like really caring person like Jesus, or if you're not religious, Mr. Rogers, and do the same exercise. How would someone that is really caring and loving think about your worst case scenario? What response, what advice would you give to someone that you loved that was in a similar situation or was going through the same type of thought experiment? So you might have also seen this really great video that's been going around by Jake Parker called Finish Not Perfect. And this sums up this idea really well. What is the worst case scenario of finishing a project but not making it perfect? It actually turns out that it's better than the best case scenario of something unfinished but flawless. One way you can look at it is that learning to finish is a skill, and it can only be learned by finishing. And so the more you finish things, the more good you're going to get at finishing. And the cool thing that's going to happen along the way is just naturally you are going to get better and better at the work. The work is going to get more perfect naturally just by you focusing on finishing. That's a little bit of a digression there. But my personal approach to dealing with perfectionism, and when perfectionism kind of like holds me back, is to be really strategic about quality. So as I'm working through a comic book, I'll identify key details or moments that are the places that I really want to spend time on. And on those places, I'll allow myself more times and more attempts to get it right. For the rest of the pages, I try and put the priority on moving forward. It probably works out to be one of these like 80-20 type of things. I do enough to tell the story on like 80%, and I try and push myself farther and really wow with the other 20%. Which, by the way, this also turns out to be the best way to tell a story too. You don't want to wow on every single page. You want to save your wows for the right moments in the story. What I found as I've done this, that my 80% that's, quote unquote good enough, gets better and better with every comic I do. So that tends to be a helpful strategy. The other part of the Now Habit that plays a big part of my day-to-day productivity is to do what Fiore calls making an unschedule. The idea is that you really just schedule your commitments and your leisure time. For this means that I have to schedule in my family commitments. So for example, I get up in the morning, I make, a green smoothie for my wife and me, and we get the kids off to school and daycare, and that goes from like 6 a.m. to 8:30. Then I have to get home around 4:40 to make dinner in time for when my wife and kids get home. So we can all have dinner and have some time together before bedtime. And after the kids are in bed, I read or I watch a show with my wife. So, basically between 8:30 to 4:40, I don't have any family commitments during that time. And so then next comes like leisure, which for me means time to work out. I'll go to the gym, maybe 3 times a week, and maybe I'll watch some Star Trek during the lunch. So I'll have some blocks of time, for those things as well. And then the weekend, I really don't work during the weekends unless like I really have to, but that hasn't been an issue in a long, long time. So the weekends are time to spend with family, to work in the yard and to work in the house. I mean, I do some community volunteering, and that oftentimes will take us some time on the weekend as well. So those are kind of my commitments, and then the time that is left is my work time. And now here's the real trick. I don't plan out how much time I'm going to spend on a project or on a task. I have a rough to-do list every day. It's really maybe 3 or 4 things on my to-do list every day, but I don't plan out what I'm going to do hour by hour. Instead, I have a planner that I use to track the time I spend working every day. So you want to focus on tracking your time rather than like planning out your day. Personally, I use the Emergent Task Planner, which I have mentioned here before. You can get it over Amazon, but I've been basically boycotting Amazon since the fall of 2015. And I figured out that you can download a free PDF from the creator's website. I'll include a link to that and just print it out like through Kinko's. I print out spiral bound booklets through Kinko's, and it turns out to be cheaper than Amazon, and I get it a lot sooner. But the idea is that over time, you are tracking your time on this planner. You're tracking how you're spending your time, and you can learn how much time you spend it takes you to do things, or kind of what your way of working is, rather than you making these wild guesses or making crazy demands on yourself. And I've now done this for a long enough time that I can be very confident in the amount of work I can produce over a given time. So it's super helpful. And that's most of what I remember for the Now habit. Like I said, just like go buy the book. Please go buy the book. Read it. I want you to read it and see how awesome it is. I hope it changes your life. Also, if you've there are a couple of other principles that are helpful to me. So I want to talk a little bit about the next action principle, and this comes from David Allen's Getting Things Done, which is, I think, a fantastic book on like productivity and organization. And there was a time where I used to be like a very, strident disciple, and I did the whole GTD process. Over time, little by little, I don't do very many of those things anymore, but the next action principle has really stuck with me, and I still find it to be a really powerful strategy to move forward on a task. So the power of the next action concept is that it's a fantastic way to get started and keep moving with a big, scary project. 90% of the challenge with procrastination is just getting started. So if you can find a simple and effective way to get started, chances are you're going to keep going. Part of the problem with a big project like a comic is that it's so big. You think of all the work that needs to get done, but really all that matters day to day is what the next thing you need to do to keep the project moving forward. And that's what next action is. All you say is, I have this project. What's the next thing I need to do to move this project forward? And that's what you write down in your to-do list. It's also important that this be very specific and granular. For example, instead of writing, work on layouts today on my to-do list, I might write drop thumbnails for pages 45 to 50 into my page template. It's this really specific, actionable thing that I'm going to do that I know is going to move the project forward. Or another example, if I need to fix my car, I'm not going to put fix car on my to-do list. I'm going to put something like call mechanic or drop off my car at mechanic, something that's very specific, a specific action. That's why it's called next action. It's not just a to-do list where it can be very vague. And you can really break a big project into a bunch of little next actions if you want to. And I've done that before, but what I've found is that most of the effectiveness of this just comes to that day-to-day intention of just choosing that one thing that you were going to attack every single day. So I think it works great for any job that you're trying to do, but you just can't figure out how to start. So just identify really clearly the next thing you need to do to move forward and just focus on doing that one thing. So the last principle that's really important for me, um, and this is super important, is to do whatever I can to avoid distractions. So like having an internet connected computer is an amazing technology, but for me, I kind of feel like it's sometimes like being a dog in a ball pit. There are just so many ways that I can be distracted with the internet. And honestly, the biggest thing that keeps me from starting on any given day is deciding to check Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or whatever the social media is that's your crack. That can be a big distraction. Those are the ones that are distractions for me. But the other really horrible thing about distractions is they are also the number one thing that derails me when I've already started working. I'll be writing or I'll be drawing, and I'll just think, oh, I'm just gonna check Facebook for a second, and then I'll find some article or video, and before I know it, I'm just stuck in this loop of just going to one video or one article after the other. So, for me, finding a way to get rid of those distractions is incredibly important. What I do is I use apps to block social media when I'm on the computer, and there's lots of great versions of these, and I've used several of them with success. So I'll share some of those in the comments too. I've also learned that I can't work in my home. I've done everything I could to get it out of the house. So I've worked at coffee shops, I've worked at libraries, at Kinko's, and the big challenge for me was finding something that was very cheap or free, and it was open when I needed it and was away from distraction. So, coffee shops are nice because they feel more social, but after a while, kind of the din of the shops gets to me. And I just kind of like hate that I feel like I need to keep buying stuff while I'm at the coffee shop. I mean, it can end up being pretty expensive every day if you like feel like you need to buy a donut and a coffee and whatever while you're there. Libraries are great, but I feel like they feel like really kind of isolated, and none of the libraries close to me are open until 10. And I like starting my day much earlier if I can. So, honestly, Kinko's is probably one of the best options if you don't want to spend any money and want a distraction-free place to work. Which I swear I am not funded by Kinko's at all. I know this is the second time I've mentioned it, but it's open 24 hours a day. It has free Wi-Fi, and they have little office areas you can go work at, and it costs nothing. But anyway, it's not sexy, but that's absolutely an option if you're looking to get away from distractions. What I finally decided to do is I finally decided to plunk down some money on a spot at a co-working space, which so far has been this best solution for me. I get out of the house, I'm way less distracted, and I'm much more focused. And I like being in an office with other people. Just that little bit of sociality kind of helps keep me sane and keeps me connected to reality. And all the printing is included in the cost, which is great with all the printing out pages I do. So we're kind of wrapping up here, but one more thing I would recommend for dealing with distraction is to consider learning to meditate. I've been meditating on and off for the last 9 years, and there are lots of benefits of meditation, but one thing that it teaches you to do is to focus and refocus after a distraction. After you've been meditating a while, you can even start to be aware of the anxiety that builds up and the urge to kind of do something else that you can feel that kind of welling up before it even happens, and kind of learn to kind of cut that off at the pass. So meditation is a great thing to learn. Great place to get started is with John Kabat-Zinn's Full Catastrophe Living. That's kind of a funny title, so again, I will leave information about that in the description. Very highly recommended. I was going to finish up there, but one thing that occurred to me that's another thing to consider if you're dealing with procrastination is, sometimes the issues that lead to procrastination are kind of serious and bigger issues, and maybe you need want to look at like professional help to do that. Maybe you want to look at some sort of therapy, or life coaching to deal with your procrastination. I went through a period of my life where I did therapy regularly, and I found it to be immensely beneficial. I mean, one of the reasons I started on the path of doing comics in the first place is because of the really great experience I had doing therapy, and how that has helped me to sort out my life. So, consider some professional help if you really feel stuck and you feel like that's going to help you kind of get over that hurdle. I think there's nothing wrong with that. So I know I'm doing lots of lastlies and one more, and also this is, but yeah, one more thing. I swear this is the last thing, but check out The War of Art. So it doesn't offer as many actionable strategies as the Now Habit, but it's kind of this fantastic philosophical exploration of the problems of procrastination, or what Stephen Pressfield calls resistance. So that's one more book I would check out. I've given you like a big reading list, but anyway, that one's fantastic. Quick read, very funny. So, maybe get the Now Habit and get The War of Art and just treat them like God's newest addition to the Bible, and make them a part of your life. Read them over and over again and just kind of really think about the principles they try to impart. But anyway, I would love to hear any strategies you have that work for you. Let me know in the comments, and hey, try out some of the things I've suggested, and you can let me know how those work in the comments as well. So I hope some of these strategies were somewhat helpful to you. If they were, please subscribe, and we will talk to you next time.